Hi, I'm Benton Stokes,
And I'm Elane O'Rourke.
and this is Cocktail Theology. Hi there.
Hi there.
How are you?
I am glad it is Sunday.
Me too. It has been a beautiful spring day today in San Jose, California. As we're recording this, it's late April and gorgeous.
It is gorgeous. It was like 70 and plus change. Really nice.
Yeah.
And we have an appropriate spring cocktail.
We do. Today we are enjoying the William Henry Harrison.
And I will explain that name in a moment.
It is Bombay Sapphire Gin. It is elderflower liqueur and fresh lemon juice.
That's it.
That's it.
But it's quite delightful.
Oh, yeah. Delightful is a great word for it.
Thank you. So I will explain this name. I will take full credit or responsibility for this one. I created this cocktail the day that our former president, Donald Trump, was, I started to say inducted, but that's wrong. When he was sworn in as president, I created it because I wanted to honor William Henry Harrison, who was only in office 30 days. And I thought that it would be, a good choice. So it was really, the cocktail itself was inspired and the name was inspired and they had to go together. That is the rather unfortunate naming of this cocktail. So William Henry Harrison.
So that's what we're enjoying for no particular reason other than it's yummy and it's springtime.
Both good.
Both really good.
We were going to do the Spriggy Pop.
Spriggy Pop will come later.
Yes.
It's another gin cocktail, but we couldn't get the appropriate gin. It requires one of our very favorite botanical gins. So when we have that on hand, we'll do Spriggy Pop again.
Yes, we will. So what are we talking about today, sir?
Today, given the state of the world right now, in spring of 2022, decided it might be appropriate to discuss war. More specifically, the question, can Christians support war? Can a Christian be pro-war?
Yeah, let's start by distinguishing between ought a Christian support war and being pro-war. I'd like to distinguish those two.
Let's do it.
Because just in the communities out of which we come, pro XYZ is used in order to denigrate an idea, right? People are pro-abortion. There are very few people who are actually pro-abortion,
right?
So that kind of language. I don't want to use that kind of language. To me, if you are pro-destruction of life in general, and I would count pro-war as being pro-destruction of life in general, that is in conflict with basic Christian values, and particularly with the idea that we are to participate in life-giving rather than life-destroying.
Right.
So I think set aside the pro-war people and just ask them to go play over there and by themselves and to not come into our sandbox anymore. But instead to talk about war instead. Any thoughts you want to lead us with? Or I can sit and do history.
Well, I was going to say, we're about to embark on a church history course in School for Seekers. And if you go back into church history, war is unavoidable. There is war where the church and war cross paths throughout history. I think that certainly there are Christians who would point to the Old Testament and say there was lots of war between various tribes of different stripes, and God took sides and God supported Israel. And many of those people would further say, and that's why we should support Israel as Christians, which that's probably a topic for another day. But war, I don't think anybody that I know who would call themselves a Christ follower thinks that war is a good thing. I think there are people who are very pro-America and pro-Jesus, or at least that's what they would say, and I'm using pro deliberately here, who would say that war is necessary, even if they would also say, of course, war is horrible. I think most of us who have paid much attention to the life of Jesus would say that he was a peaceable guy
In general?
in general, and that more likely than not he would fall on the side of anti-war pacifism, probably. And as those who pursue God in the way of Jesus, we ought to do likewise. I think that's a reasonable thing to assert. But then, of course, there are going to be lots of Christians who will say, but this, but that. There are these exceptions. And of course, yes, living in a fallen world gives us, unfortunately, exceptions. So I think the question then becomes, what are circumstances in which Christians can support or should support war?
And the question morphed. Yeah, it was interesting to watch you walk through that and to hear the language you used and the reasoning you used. Not bad, but interesting. Many years ago when I was teaching philosophy, we were at war, and I worked up a class called Philosophy of Nonviolence and tracked it everywhere and kind of tried to tease out what nonviolence is and where it came from and why anyone would hold to it, and then critiqued it, Mm-hmm. And I liked one thing you said about Jesus being probably more inclined to pacifism.
Yes.
Is, you didn't say this, but here's what I heard, that Jesus would be inclined to pacifism, but not passivity. And I do want to lift up the distinction between pacifism and passivity. I think that the civil rights movements that Gandhi led and MLK led and other people led were absolutely grounded in nonviolence, in ahimsa, but were certainly not passive. And I do think that sometimes when people decry pacifism, they think passivity. We don't want to get trampled by the bad guy. Well, you don't have to get trampled necessarily, right? I mean, there are conditions when you do, but so I do want to distinguish between those two. Yeah, and I did a little research before I came in because that's me. And so the first Christian discussion of what war is and should be was by St. Augustine or Augustine, depending upon whether you're speaking as a Protestant or a Catholic, which one you say. Augustine of Hippo, I'm just going to go back and forth, wrote out some qualifications for just war. Now, he actually was drawing on Aristotle, and he didn't go into the details of it the way that Aquinas did later. Aquinas gave us the one that we kind of stick to.
Okay.
But what he said was that the fact that Scripture has swords and we are advised to take up swords means that we're not supposed to be trampled, basically. But he gave some pretty strict restrictions on the human person who can morally do that. And that's where in strict Christian assessment of war, without grabbing onto other things, there are three conditions for war. And this is what Aquinas came up with.
Okay.
And so Aquinas said it has to be the prevention of worse evil. Okay. So the person you are about to attack or the group you are about to attack has to have done something awful to start it.
Gotcha.
And it can't just be that they offended you. Offense is not sufficient, right? It has to be actually an aggression that would suit the world better if it were stopped. That makes sense? The second qualification is that it has to be done appropriately and as mindfully as possible, with as little destruction as possible, with as little killing as possible, that kind of thing. And then, you can talk about the details of that. The third one, which we almost never talk about, is that the right people have to do it.
Oh.
It has to be people of some maturity who are not going in just for the killing, just for the whatever. They're going in with the consciousness that war is a last resort and not with a banner. I mean, they may have a banner, but that the banner isn't the goal. The goal is to stop the destruction that's happening.
Ah, right.
And they're supposed to be coming out of a Christian place, right? So this would be the correct soldiers then would be people who had gone through Christian discipline and were thoughtful philosopher kings, right? To use Plato's way of thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
But people who are settled in themselves and have thought about this. So that would be Aquinas's view. Now, of course, our view is you find the youngest people you can legally throw in. They've got energy, they are easily taught to do something, and you don't want to kill off the generals.
Yeah.
Right? That's exactly the opposite of the just war idea. That's the framework that Christianity has sort of clung to, and actually, modern nations cling to as the notion of a just war. Now, whether anyone in power these days actually cares about just wars, it's not clear to me at this moment.
Right. So looking at our present situation, the war that's going on in Ukraine, I could see based on what you said that there is an argument to be made that this is a just war because Russia was the aggressor. It was an unprovoked aggression. And in the course of this aggression, there have been many, many innocents killed.
Yes.
All in the name of simply overtaking
Yes.
what is perceived as a weaker republic or weaker empire,
Yes.
whatever.
Exactly.
Taking back something
Yes.
is the way Putin looks at this. Is He's taking back something that
Right.
was the Soviet Union to begin with.
Right. Yeah.
Whatever.
He wants to rebuild Father Russia.
Right.
I mean, that's all that is.
Right. So there is justification on that basis alone
Yes.
that this is a just war.
Yeah. So that gives you the conditions for it, right? So that gives you the party that you would be attacking started this thing and is conducting it in a way that is inappropriate. They are doing aggression that will continue to escalate and continue to be off the charts, right?
Right.
So those are your first. That takes care of that first, the just cause. Okay. So that's one.
That's one. Of course, the third condition is very much on whoever is opposing Russia to make sure that the people that are moving this war forward on the defensive side are people that you're talking about, that are mature, that are coming at it from a quote-unquote Christian ideal or Christian place.
And that one seems the least likely to be held up from
Yes.
my perspective. Though doing it in a good way seems to have gone by the wayside in the last 20 years as well. Like the idea that we might be honorable,
Right.
that we should aim for being honorable and just and decent.
Right.
Seems to have kind of disappeared
Oh, yeah.
in the conversation.
Yeah.
But that would be another piece of it as well.
I would say something interesting in this particular conflict that we're seeing are people taking up arms on behalf of Ukraine that appear to be doing it for very noble reasons. They aren't warmongers. They recognize the injustice of what's happening and they're rising up. And many of these, of course, are Ukrainians, but some are people from other countries
Absolutely.
that are coming in to aid.
Yes.
So while I wouldn't necessarily say that they meet the requirement of the third, I think they're closer than
Yes.
throwing 18-year-old boys at a war.
Yeah.
And saying,
girls.
Yeah, and girls, and shoot them up.
Yep.
So it is a different ideal.
Right.
And of course, Ukraine is such the underdog here in this conflict.
Yes.
The fact that they're still in it really is a testament to that fighting spirit of the Ukrainian people and the leadership of their president, frankly, who refuses to step aside.
Yeah.
So I think there's some things to be learned from this conflict. I think and when we look back on it years from now, we will see, regardless of how it plays out, that the way that it was conducted on the part of the Ukrainian people was honorable.
From your lips to God's ears and back down to the Ukrainians.
Yeah.
I mean, the problem with people, in this case Russia, wreaking wars of terror is it's very hard not to want to terrorize back. I have wondered, and I'm not in any way at all promoting even the idea of just war at the moment. I'm not sure how I feel about all of it.
Right.
But I have wondered why in the heck we haven't just bombed the bejesus out of Russia.
Right.
And from a purely, I mean, I know why, right? I know there's the fear of nuclear war, there's, world war, all of those things. But, and given our rhetoric and given the world's rhetoric over the last 20 years or so, the idea that we wouldn't just go and stop this madman, I'm using that language deliberately, this madman, I found really fascinating. And, part of it, at least in this particular case, is the fact that one of our parties loves Father Russia and finds in their current leader a comrade in arms.
Yes.
That makes it tougher.
It does.
But it is interesting. I've watched it interestedly. I wonder if our oil reserves were actually at risk, whether we wouldn't have done something differently.
Right, because as we all know, self-interest is a huge reason why people get in or stay out of these kinds of conflicts.
So there's all that about the just war, and there's the way of thinking about it. And I think the one that's most interesting for us as Christians, or as people who are trying to follow Jesus, or trying to make sense out of that, is that notion of who am I in this?
Yes.
Who am I in this? And, we talk about this all the time, right? Like, you can talk your story about your baptism and your conversion and how often you go to church and how much money you give and whether you serve on this and whether you do that. And if you're being an ass, it doesn't matter.
Really matter. Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
We've shown, in fact, and you're doing it regularly. I mean, we all screw up, but, you're doing it regular. It means that, in fact, your spirit either wasn't regenerated or you haven't chosen to listen to the calling of the Spirit.
Right.
To get healed, do the things you need to do.
Right.
So I do think that however one feels about any particular war or about war in general, that call for us to be thoughtful, resistant to excess, those kinds of things are huge. They're huge. And for Jesus followers, we must always be thinking about how are we hurting other people?
Yes.
What can we do about ourselves to become people who are more likely to be kind, good, just, measured, and so forth?
Exactly.
Right? And, usually that has a whole bunch of psychological healing involved, right? I would say, too, that at this point, I don't think we can have, as at least as Americans, that we can have a just war without thinking about actually caring for the people who go out and fight it. I think the fact that we have so completely abandoned veterans, the fact that the people who fly drones and have to watch someone over time and get to know their families and everything so they can hit them at exactly the right moment, those people suffer PTSD. The fact that we ignore this makes any kind of action we take unjust because we're not coming at it in the right way.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah.
So that kind of takes it out of the whole, is war a good thing or is war a bad thing, but sometimes justified, and puts it back in the who are we being? And as Christians, it always is. It always comes back to who are we being?
Who are we being? With the war in Ukraine, of course, we've gotten involved to a degree. There are certainly people who believe we should be involved more. And interestingly, it seems the people that believe we should be involved more are more on the political left than right. Because again, as you mentioned, there are many on the political right that really align their points of view politically with Russia, which is strange.
Well, with the leader of Russia.
The leader of Russia, right.
Specifically.
Right. So it will be interesting to watch how this plays out. And I do think that historically it has taken a lot of self-interest for the United States to get involved in a war. There has to be a lot at stake. And I think up until now, other than the oil reserves in Russia, there's not been a whole lot at stake. We've not had a really compelling reason to put skin in this. But of all the conflicts that I've seen recently, and of course there have been atrocities in all of the things we've been involved in Afghanistan, Iran, and in many wars that we chose to stay out of. But I think certainly as Christians, our frontline effort is to pray and to donate and to assist however we can from where we are. I think that is something that Jesus would have us do.
And speak against the injustice of it. I think be loud and say, you know what? This is wrong. What's happening is wrong. And yes, you can quote me on that. What's happening is wrong. And it needs to end. I am not a good understander of how to end it well, but it must end. And anyone who is supporting it, including the Russian Orthodox Church leadership, should be looking at their claim to be Christian.
Yes.
In my view.
Agreed.
So we really want to know what you think about this. So please, please, please reach out to us. You can say, be polite. We aim for we aim for polite, both from us and from our listeners.
Right.
So be polite, but we love questions. We love disagreement. We love different ways of thinking about things. So please reach out to us. And how can they do that, Benton?
They can reach out to us via email at Benton, BENTON, at schoolforseekers.com, or Elane, ELANE, at schoolforseekers.com. Also, we are looking for words and phrases that you feel beat up by, and language that has... maybe it needs some clarification from a biblical and sensible point of view. We tackled born again in our last episode. What's another phrase or word that you'd like us to approach? Give us those too. Till next time.
Bye.
Bye.
We need more William.
More
Henry
William.
Harrison.
Yes.
Okay.
Right now. Bye.
Bye.